To love learning. To laugh.
To love.
To be loved. To see beauty.
To understand.
To bring grace.
To the things that matter most.
This is Psychology America with Dr. Alexandra. Welcome to my show. For every life stage, we have questions. Let's enhance our lives together as we explore the things that matter most. Welcome to Psychology America with Dr. Alexandra. Thank you for coming today. This podcast is about the topic of forgiveness. Forgiveness in our relationships, in our personal relationships. And I have three guests here with me. I have Rabbi Mendel Dubov. You are a member of the faculty of the Rabbinical College of America and the Director of Chabad in Sussex County, New Jersey, where I live. And you grew up in Wimbledon, England.
Yes.
We also have Saifulla Chaudahry, board member and local outreach coordinator for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, North New Jersey chapter. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
And Pastor Michael Bos, senior minister of Marble Collegiate Church in New York City, Manhattan, president of the Collegiate Churches of New York, recipient of the U.S. Ambassador's Award for Community Service for starting the first interfaith center for dialogue in the Arabian Peninsula. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Pastor Michael, you and I have something in common.
Michael's great too.
Okay. We have two things in common. We both went to Duke.
Yes.
And we both subject ourselves to a tennis clinic where we get yelled at by a pro named Cal.
Absolutely.
I consider it a form of therapy, actually.
I do too. There's something nice about it.
There is.
We're both in professions where you always have to be nice. And on the tennis court, it's a chance to be not so nice sometimes.
And I find that the yin and yang of my existence to be able to do what I do.
Yeah, you do. We do release something on the court. Yeah. So forgiveness, in terms of psychology and what psychology studies have found that forgiveness will decrease anxiety, decrease depression, decrease the anger that we feel. It'll also improve our relationships, not just the relationship with the person that offended you, but the relationships with everyone else around you. And it'll improve your self-esteem and your sense of well-being. And I'm here to share some of what psychology has found, but I'm also looking forward to your perspectives on this topic. So why don't we start with the question of what is the definition of forgiveness? And either I could start with the psychological definition of forgiveness, or anyone else can begin.
I'd be interested to hear what psychology says about this.
Gladly, sure. Yeah. So what I like to tell my patients is a definition that I read a few years ago, and it goes like this. Even though the person who you would like to forgive has offended you, and they don't necessarily deserve forgiveness, you do two things. There are two parts. The first part is you don't do your resentment response. The resentment response is either to attack or to withdraw, or both. The second part is you treat the person to willful acts of benevolence. Some people might feel like the first part, like, well, I started talking to them, so that's my act of benevolence, but that's not enough. It's more. In a simple term, it would be you would make them cookies. It would be like extra, besides just talking to them again.
I feel that's the doing of forgiveness.
Yes.
About the definition itself, I like to, we have in Judaism a day, Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. The word Kippur is translated as a day of atonement. Atonement is highly associated, obviously, with forgiveness. But why forgive? Actually, we are told that no confession, no amends is possible between man and God for actions between man and his fellow, and one must ask for forgiveness or give forgiveness to one's fellow or with one's fellow in order to be able to make amends with God for that very same action. And then the question becomes to me, why forgive? And when there's a why, then we know what to do. We've gone halfway. And in a sentence, to me, the why of forgiveness is that there is a place between the two parties, a place of soul, which the action that was committed isn't there, can melt away, can be lost.
Can you say that again? Within the soul?
There is a place within a person's soul.
Yes.
Where, the body, if you want to look at it as crudely as between body and soul, but the body or bodily self of a person, we are self-centered, in essence. We want it well for ourselves, and if somebody else has done something against us, then we find it hard to relate to that person, to connect with that person. On a level of soul, where it's life itself, and in that sense, the giver of life, that matters, then then everything else becomes secondary, becomes a little less important, to put it simply. And therefore, so he did that, so she did that, but aren't there more important things? Isn't our bond that ought to be deeper than that action? Now, obviously, however grave the action is, that's how deep you have to dig. But we're taught that the recesses of the soul is eternal, and that there will be a place within you and within the other party that you are essentially not distinct. You are essentially one. And of course, in every setting, that can apply in different ways. I was thinking more in a marriage setting where where this would apply in a most immediate sense.
Yes. So. Well, when you talk about recognizing that we are one, I'm thinking about the different phases of forgiveness within forgiveness therapy, within psychology. And I want to give credit for Enright and Fitzgibbons for this. But the first phase is really recognizing your pain and all that's involved with your pain about the offense. The second phase is a decision to forgive. And after that is what's called the work. And when it comes to the work part, because just making the decision isn't enough, the work has to do with recognizing the humanity of the offender. And I think when we don't want to forgive someone, we want to just make them evil and not human.
That's where I get into the why. That's precisely where I am. Yeah.
Yes, and that's what you made me think of. So how can we see that other person as human or as vulnerable? It's hard to see them as vulnerable.
We again have to go back. And in various settings, this applies in various ways. In a marriage setting, it would apply one way; in a work setting, in another way, just in general, another way. But it goes back to I think to the very core of the what we are here, the Abrahamic monotheisms of the intrinsic sacredness of and value of another person, regardless who they are. Not to say if they are your spouse. That's a whole different story. But any person, we're told right at the beginning of the Genesis that every individual is in the image of God, for whatever that means. But the idea is that there is, the Talmud tells a story.
Let's hear
Just
the story.
like telling stories.
Yes.
A great Talmudic sage was once on the road coming back from his studies, and he was feeling quite elated or good about himself. And he was riding down, and he came across a man who was, as the Talmud described it, exceedingly ugly. Now, it doesn't mean physical appearance. It meant just a person in whom he could not find anything positive.
Right.
And he was just so taken by this individual that he spurted out, "Do they make all the people in your town the same way as you?" And the man looked up at him and said, "Well, if you have a complaint, you should place it by the craftsmen who crafted me." And the Talmud goes on, and that it hit him like nothing else. And it was a long process, and the man would not forgive him until he came to his city, and people came out to greet him because he was a great scholar. And the man said, "This, you treat us, this is a scholar, this is a person you come out to honor." And people asked him to please forgive him because he was indeed a good man. This was something which he had, it was a slip. But that's really the idea, that every individual is sacred, is holy, and because of that, there is a non-negotiable dignity that every person has. And being that that's the case, it becomes in Judaism, it's an obligation.
So
We don't have a choice in that sense.
how do we do that? Because, conceptually, maybe we'd like to recognize the dignity of everyone. But when you're really hurt, how can you pause to recognize someone's dignity and humanity and vulnerability on a practical level?
I'd say you'd answer the question, pause. That's the,
Reflection.
yeah.
Absolutely. I think in ourselves, the importance of forgiving ourselves is recognized a lot as well. And I think that comes from, everyone makes mistakes, and us not being perfect.
Yes.
And while we are made in the image of God, and that's our belief, that we have the capability of the things that God does. He can see, he can hear, but he's all seeing and all hearing. But he also is very forgiving, and his mercy overwhelms his wrath. And we should be, as being made in his image, be cognizant of that, and try to reflect on our mistakes and try to limit our wrath and recognize the opportunity to forgive.
So you're talking about, you mentioned forgiving yourself too.
In the sense that if you can look back at your life and the mistakes that you have made, if you can find a reason that you should have been forgiven, and then also you have to forgive yourself for the mistake you've made, then it would go both ways. And then also asking God for forgiveness and his help and his support in being able to do these things.
I think there are situations, and I do think that when people have faith, it helps, doesn't it? Because those with faith have one additional way to cope and to say, I can't handle this, but with your help, I can. I can't do this on my own.
It's an interesting point, because I think from a faith perspective, faith helps us reflect on our own humanity and its limitations. And by reflecting on that, pausing for that, I think we recognize that we have limitations for which we've needed forgiveness, which puts us in touch with someone else's humanity for which they need forgiveness.
Yes.
But I wonder in this if sometimes we attach forgiveness to reconciliation too strongly, that if they're not two separate concepts.
I think they are two separate concepts.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Interrelated. Well, as we're having this conversation, you asked the great question, why do we forgive? Lou Smedes, who's since passed away, but was really a great Christian theologian, and he wrote a lot about forgiveness, which
people couldn't get enough of, because we all, to be human and be in relationships means we need forgiveness. There has to be a place for forgiveness or we can't continue on. But he separated forgiveness from reconciliation and being reunited with someone. And he said this, that to forgive someone is to set the prisoner free and to realize the prisoner was you.
Yeah.
And for me, that really gets at the work of forgiveness, because there are times somebody's hurt or harmed us and they may have died. There is no reconciliation possible, yet is forgiveness still possible? And I believe it is. It's kind of the healing of that memory that allows you to not have the pain of the past control your future. And I think that's such a gift from a faith perspective to find that.
Forgiveness, I believe, is for the person doing the forgiving.
Yes.
I agree.
Yeah, I think it is. But I think it's the precursor to reconciliation. If you can't forgive someone, you can't find your way back into relationship with them. But yet you can forgive and you might not be able to reconcile. It might take a while for you, or it might be the other person who is unwilling to do so. But to be in the position that you're open to that, I think frees you to live again.
Yes, I think it can lead to reconciliation, but reconciliation requires both parties. And like you're saying, we can't always control the other party.
No, we can't at all.
But you can free yourself of all the pain.
Yes.
Of unforgiveness, which does cause pain. In fact, it affects our hearts. It's been shown through a study so there's something called myocardial perfusion, which is the blood flow rate around your heart, and anger will restrict that. So unforgiveness has been shown that if you are unforgiving, you have a poor blood flow rate around your heart, but if you go through forgiveness therapy, it improves.
I can imagine it would. I mean, to carry the wounds of the past and to harbor such ill will towards others because of the pain you carry, it's a tremendous weight to bear in life. And that's why forgiveness is such an important concept for us all.
Yeah, I think you've made an incredible point about them being different, and sometimes us relating every sort of word together because they're like in the same sort of field, they're similar. And reconciliation is probably something you want to achieve through forgiveness. But I think it's really, because like when in the beginning you were talking about the definition of forgiveness.
Yes.
I was just thinking that it's a feeling of being wronged. Right?
It begins with that.
It sort of begins
there. You don't shut that out. You know rationally that you've been wronged in your mind.
I think what's interesting is maybe on the other side, the other person might not have felt that you were wronged. So maybe if you are, even the forgiveness aspect of it might not make sense to both parties. One party might feel like forgiveness is necessary, while the other one thinks this is something normal. Every situation would be unique in that sense. So that whole perspective of maybe, the concept of forgiving yourself or just figuring out a way of freeing yourself from the prison is just so important, that it's really about you as the individual, and the benefits are really to you, not to the other party necessarily.
Yes.
Even though the wrongness could go both ways.
Yes. It can begin. What do you think about the phase that forgiveness is a decision?
I think that's a really important thing. When you feel you're wronged, there's essentially two options I see from an Islamic perspective. One would be justice, that you achieve equality in some respect, some fairness is achieved, so that you don't even need forgiveness at that point because you've been whole. Originally you were wronged, and now you can be made whole through justice. And the other is forgiveness, which in faith we always believe is the greater thing. Because again, if we're made in God's image, then God's forgiveness and mercy overwhelms his wrath. And we want to be like him. Yes. As he is our creator. He made us in his image. So that's the greater path by which to go by. Because justice would claim you're wrong, but wouldn't free you from the difficulty that you're going through. You might feel okay for a little while, but forgiving yourself, forgiving the other person is going to bring understanding. We're all human. We all make mistakes, and an opportunity to grow, and you might understand their perspective better. There's so much to achieve in forgiveness that you can't have in justice. But that's a decision. You have to make a decision about what you want.
Yes. Once in psychology, once you make the decision to forgive and then you move into what's called the work phase. So one part of the work phase is to try to understand the humanity of the one who offended you. And you could do that by trying to, if you know them, you could say, how did they grow up? Or what was their perspective? What would they have said about the situation? What is it that they want? Okay, they want well-being for themselves. They want to be happy. And recognizing all of that humanity is a part of it that will help and can be very difficult for people to do, to step into that person's shoes or to see them with kindness. But there's another possible thing that you can do in the work phase, which you just made me think of. And it's called bearing the pain. And I'm going to give an example within couples therapy. It has to do with something called repair attempts. So when couples fight, and this will apply to any two people that fight within a household, okay? When two people fight, they tend to fight in the same exact way over and over and over again, and the subjects will change, but it's the same process. Like person A will start like this, and then person B does this, and then person A feels this and then does this, and they go back and forth in the same exact way. And it's called the negative cycle. So once a couple recognizes the negative cycle and what it is, then I will encourage them to do what's called repair attempts. So they're in the negative cycle. They want to do it the same way as always. But then one of them will break it, either with a funny, or, they'll touch them, or they'll make a joke, or they'll be like, oh, come on, let's stop. Or, it's a small repair attempt.
They recognize that they're in that cycle.
They recognize they're in a cycle. They have the courage to make the repair attempt. The other person has to have the courage to accept it. In happy couples, a repair attempt will be made and the other one will accept. In unhappy couples, there will be a repair attempt and the other one will reject it, or there won't even be a repair attempt like that. So I'm thinking of that in terms of bearing the pain as part of breaking a cycle with forgiveness, because it takes pain on both sides.
Don't you think people sometimes want to avoid the pain by trying to forget rather than forgive? I don't know if you encounter that or any of you encounter that, but it's kind of, it seems to be the shortcut to get to the place you want to be. So you just stuff it and think, I don't need to forgive. If I could just not think about it, it has no power over me.
Yeah, but minimize it maybe. It's not a big deal.
Exactly.
Just forget it.
Intellectualize it in some way. Yeah, exactly.
That's just how that person is.
Yes, yeah. Excuse it.
Yeah, excuse
but it's still you bear the wounds and you're not willing to go to that place where you're willing to bear the pain that really did hurt. I was wronged.
Yes.
And it still impacts me to this day, and wrestling with what that means.
And perhaps that's why it shows up in your other relationships. When you haven't forgiven the offender, now you're going to be more angry towards other people in your life.
I think in insofar as faith goes, I think there's a very crucial aspect. I mean, speaking obviously within psychology, there's going to be a certain nucleus. Within faith, is going to be a different nucleus. Those are obviously not going to be mutually exclusive, as you say. They complement one another intensely. The stories of faith that we read constantly. I mean, I believe the earliest story in all of literature of faith is the story of Joseph and his brothers.
Oh, wow. That's a wonderful story. I'm so happy you're telling it.
Forgiveness, I apologize.
It's incredible. Yes.
Yeah. And the most pivotal moment in that story, I'm sure you remember.
Do you want to tell listeners the whole story? Because I think it's really
briefly.
Great. Yeah.
Briefly, the story is that Joseph is the oldest son of the originally intended only wife of Jacob, and for which reason Jacob favors him. He was born after Rachel was childless for many years, and Jacob showed a favoritism to Joseph, which didn't bear well on the rest of the other brothers who were his half brothers, and they ended up, after a whole spiral of events, ended up throwing him in a pit, and then afterwards he was sold as a slave.
They threw him in a pit and they abandoned him.
And actually, no, they didn't. They abandoned him in the beginning, and then they got together and said, well, what use is it that he should just die in the pit? Let's sell him and get some money for him. And that's how low it got.
Yeah.
And he ended up being sold to a slave in Egypt, and he was sold into the house of the overseer of the kitchens of Pharaoh, and he worked his way up in the estate of this individual, Potiphar, who was a very wealthy man, and he became the manager of his entire estate. Until one day, there was an accusation. The wife of Potiphar took a liking to him, and when no one was in the house, she approached him in a very strong manner, and he fled. And then she turned it round on him that he had wanted to seduce her, for which his master threw him again Joseph into a jail where he spent the next 12 years. And only through a very fascinating sequence of events, by interpreting a dream of another two inmates that were there, that were workers for Pharaoh, he was seen as a good interpreter of dreams. And when Pharaoh had a peculiar dream, he was brought out and made to stand in front of Pharaoh. He deciphered the dreams exactly as Pharaoh had expected it. It sounded exactly right. And he, on the spot, appointed him as the second to the king, as the viceroy in Egypt. As the story went, the prescription of the dream was that there was going to be 7 years of great plenty in Egypt and then 7 years of famine. The famine struck, and the famine was a regional one, and Israel obviously was included in that, so the land of Canaan as it was. And Jacob sent his sons to go down to Egypt to fetch food, because Joseph had instructed and made the provisions for these 7 years of famine, and he had the jurisdiction over all the food in Egypt. And they came down, and Joseph disguised himself. They had no idea he was even still alive. Joseph disguised himself. He summoned them to him and made an entire conspiracy. And it basically that they had to bring their other brother down, and then made a conspiracy that that they had stolen something of his, for which reason he put them in the corner of that his personal younger brother, his full brother, would be held hostage by him under an accusation of stealing his cup, his goblet, and the rest can go free. And he put them in that place to see whether they would risk themselves to free their brother. In other words, if they had come round the action that they had done to him. And at that moment, when Yehuda, the brother, went and put himself out there that he was going to do anything and everything to get his brother back, then Joseph revealed himself and said, "I am Joseph." The moment after that's the synopsis of the story, but it's a very dramatic and deeply painful story on many levels. The moment, though, that is of the moment of which is the most intense moment possibly of the entire story, is after Jacob's death. And here the brothers are, Jacob eventually came over to Egypt. He was given, first-class treatment. But the brothers were wary that after Jacob's death, that now will be the time that Joseph would begin to let out what they had done to him.
Revenge.
Pardon?
Revenge.
The consequences are coming now,
consequences
right?
now.
They were withheld until father died.
It was suppressed until for
Yeah.
the honor of the old man, and now it's going to come out in one way or another. They came to Joseph and made a story which wasn't true. They said that our father had asked before he died, "Please, we beg of you to forgive the sin that we did unto you." And Joseph, in the verse, took offense. And he said, he understood straight away that this was not something his father would have said, And he didn't understand. The verses come across and saying that he didn't understand what they wanted from him. And the Hebrew is that he tells them, Lo atem shlachtem osti heno, you did not send me here. Ki ho Elokim, it was God that sent me here. And he put me here to become a manager of Pharaoh's entire estate and to save the entire region from disaster, from hunger. So that is I believe, the earliest. I don't think there is a story of forgiveness as early as that in history, which is very interesting that even in biblical text, the first story of forgiveness is interpersonal forgiveness. There is no story of God forgiving before there's a story of people forgiving each other.
Forgiveness is interpersonal. It is.
So in faith, we have there's the pyramid. There are the two sides of the interpersonal tension, possibly. But then there is, and this comes back to what I said before, that there is the top of the pyramid. There's going to be a place where it's not you that did it. In Joseph's case, he understood clearly that regardless of why he had to suffer, that was put aside. It wasn't you that did it. You were an agent for something that for some reason I had to go through. That's my question, the question of all questions, to my Creator. But you were agents to do it. Now that doesn't mean you might bring up the justification. That's not justifying it. They were not justified at all for what they did. But how here it's a demonstration. Joseph was speaking his own heart out to them. This is how I see it. And he saw it that way so deeply that he didn't understand what they wanted from him even.
And
that's really the power of faith, the power of belief, and recognizing that you're placed somewhere to do something, especially in his case, which was to do so much good, that not even being able to comprehend the need to forgive. Whereas they were so concerned about forgiveness.
And
it's such an individual
perspective. A larger meaning of why he had to suffer at that time. And yes, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's such a great story, because what's interesting about the story of Joseph is that there are texts where it seems God is so present and in communication with a person, where with Joseph, it isn't presented that way. But yet there's a deep trust within Joseph that God is present, and that culmination point of the story is one of those lines where, what they intended for evil, God used for good.
That's fascinating. Yeah. There is no communication of God to Joseph in that whole time.
Yes, but yet there's that faith, that trust that somehow this will work out in some way, even though you don't understand it at the time. And from a faith perspective, I wonder if that's not such a big part of what forgiveness is, that it's not just the healing of the memory, but it's a trust that when things like this happen and we bear the pain and the suffering, that somehow God can help us pick up the pieces and use that in ways that we did not imagine or envision before.
And that is the last phase of forgiveness therapy within psychology. It's called the deepening. So the first phase is understanding all of the pain and recognizing the pain. The second is the decision, like we talked about. Then there's the work. And the last phase is the deepening. And as part of that phase, you try to understand the bigger picture, or try to understand the meaning, like what we're talking about, or maybe even create in your mind a possible narrative for why this makes sense, or why, what's good about all of this.
That's what you mean by deepening. In other words, within the individual.
Yes.
Possibly divorced of the other individual, the perpetrator. That's very... Would you mind another story? Because there is a biblical story.
I would love another story. Yes.
Well, the deepening. I've never termed it that way. That's the professional term for it. But the story I would immediately associate with that is a breathtaking story, which is with King David. If you may recall. King David suffered a lot, and possibly the lowest point of his life was when his son Avshalom made a rebellion against him. He was a very popular guy, and he convinced much of the majority of the people that the time of the old man is finished, and I'll do it much better for you. And the scene in the Book of Kings, the scene is shot where King David is running away on foot from his own son. Yeah. And out comes a teacher of his, a teacher called Shimei ben Gera, Shimei the son of Gera. And this teacher of his was a great scholar, but had, for whatever reason, sided with Avshalom, with the son, and had not liked David. And this teacher of his came out and started to bitterly curse King David, throw things at him, just insult him in the lowest of ways. King David was running with his men, and his general. King David was a king, and in those days, for sure, such speech to a king warranted capital punishment. And his general said, "Let me finish him off." And King David said, "I instruct you not to touch him." And he says, "Ki Hashem amalo kalel." God told him to curse. Now, God had never told him to curse. The interesting, and I mean, the general was beside himself. He just couldn't understand it. And the fascinating thing was, King David made off, and at the end of his life, in his will to his son King Solomon, David instructs him to, organize it that this individual, Shimei ben Gera, receive his due punishment, which he did. At the end, in his last will and testament, King David had a list of people whom he hadn't finished business with, both for the good and for the bad, and he told his son Solomon to do it, and how. And he was supposed to basically, scrutinize this man who had shown this sentiment to him, because he was a danger. Obviously, he was a danger to Solomon as well. And King Solomon, put him under surveillance and found, that he wasn't a faithful citizen at all, and basically had him killed, but in a justified way. But he dealt with him. This is how it was. Now, what was the analysis of the story, which again has been done throughout the generations, was you brought up justice versus forgiveness. The God told him to curse was David's feeling at the time. David had justified to himself the whole thing, and had taken the whole rebellion of his son Avshalom as an atonement, as a sort of a reconciliation, if you want, with God for the story of Bathsheba, the story of that he had with for his own sin, and therefore that was his rationale for it. He was ready at that moment to sponge up whatever it was. He had made peace with the fact that he had to go through this. And whatever it was at that time that he had to go through, he was ready for it. And if that would have meant, that his teacher of all people would come, and when he's running away on foot from his own child, that this should, to pour salt on the wounds, he was going to take it. He wasn't going to do anything. Then the law is the law, and you cannot. You do have, especially a person who is a political leader, the law doesn't fall away. But the law, he was not going to administer the law with the passion of revenge. He was going to wait, and he he waited it out till the end of his life, and then he said, "Well, okay, then now that I have fully accepted that was something that was not him, as we said before. It was God that told him to curse, and that has made me somehow." Stronger, that's made me somehow more connected with my own soul, with God. Okay, now that that's been shelved, okay, then business does need to be taken care of. Justice does need to be done. So I think that story, again, as you say, it's the deepening. It's bringing out a way that this experience has not been in vain. This experience has just not been just to hurt me. On the contrary, I have to take every experience and grow from it and become stronger from it, learn from it, and perhaps help other people from it. In whichever way we take it, whether it is atonement, whether it is strength, whether it is, as they say, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Whenever way we take it, it's not a contradiction to, the rules are the rules, and the rules have to be kept. Rules don't fall away. Justice doesn't fall away because of forgiveness or because of righteousness. We speak about many verses hand in hand. Righteousness and justice both have to be done together. But sometimes not simultaneously, because simultaneously it means that the forgiveness hasn't happened. So that's if you talk about deepening, I think that's a most powerful story.
Well, it raises a couple issues as I think about it. One is the connection between forgiveness and consequences. To forgive are the consequences then exempt? They're gone. And if there are consequences, maybe how we approach those consequences shows whether we've truly forgiven or not. Because we can, as you were talking, I think there are times when there are consequences for an individual, and this is a bit of the Schadenfreude, right? At somebody else's struggle and pain, we feel great joy because of what they've done to us. But if you've forgiven, that's not what you feel. I was thinking about raising children. I have two wonderful kids, grown and gone now. But when they were being raised, there were times they did things that were wrong. They'd say they're sorry. I'd forgive them. And of course, the question would come, does that mean I'm not grounded? No, you're still grounded.
Use the lollipop.
Example.
So that's part of the lesson of life, of their growth and thinking about what they've done. That's part of the consequences. It doesn't mean I didn't forgive them.
Yes.
I'm not going to hold them against them. I don't carry wounds. But yet their consequences were important for their learning and development. To know there are consequences to our actions, even though someone can forgive us.
But that wouldn't be revenge, though.
No, not revenge. Absolutely. That's
that's
a
completely different concept, right? This was even more care and concern for it's almost like the whole fool me once, shame on me.
Yeah.
Or sorry, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. So you're trying to make sure the second time the fooling doesn't happen. So they know there's value to it. So you don't want to condone it, but there's also a recognition of the value of it. I think that's incredibly important, that they are separate things that have their own place and everything has value there.
Yeah.
Forgiveness isn't necessarily condoning.
No.
It's necessarily not.
It is not.
Yes.
That would lead to the pain of resentment if you just overlook injustices, overlook. That's very different.
So on Yom Kippur and in Judaism, we stand there listing off all the common sins in public, in plural. And it's quite a list.
All the common things that
everybody, and mostly the vast majority of them are interpersonal, not between man and God, but interpersonal sins, and we lay it all out. We lay it all bare. There's a text for it, and of course it's not condoning. And we say that, but our bond. Is deeper, isn't it? And even though we may have done all this, but isn't our bond is unbreakable, and when that bond is laid bare, then iniquity or then that damage can fall away. I think it's it's one of the great. It's a tremendously deep. It's a faith concept. That damage, that evil is not eternal. It has an end. It has a limit. That's why I think faith is so powerful within the forgiveness process, is because after all said and done, you know that there's something greater, that there's something greater within that other person, there's something greater between both, that there's a greater picture. If there isn't a greater picture, then again we go back to, why should I let it go? So maybe a greater picture for me, my own health.
Yeah.
That's definitely one route. Especially in the faith route, there is a greater picture altogether.
I think we were speaking about that earlier, about how the value of forgiveness is also very much towards you more so than the other individual. So condoning it is like, saying that the other person's behavior is what the primary concern is. That might not even matter as much when your own health and your own interpersonal relationship or your own betterment, your own personal development is dependent upon you forgiving. So while there's obviously a concern that, okay, you've been wrong and you want some sort of justice, there's something greater than that. And forgiveness is just so powerful. There's so much more to it there.
It could start with recognizing the health benefits. When folks start forgiveness therapy, it can be very hard to actually empathize with the offender. And psychology has found that it's easier for patients to start to think about it cognitively, not emotionally in the beginning, meaning they think with a certain part of the brain that is not emotional about the offender in a way that makes them more human. The emotional part comes later. You have to decide and begin this process and begin the action of forgiveness, like I was saying, withholding the resentment response of attacking or withdrawing, treating them to willful acts of benevolence. Sometimes that comes later. They're called moral gifts. A moral gift could even be a smile.
Yeah, in Islam, the Holy Prophet has said that giving a smile to someone is an act of charity. And charity is an incredible, like in terms of the rewards and blessings related to charity. But even in a moment where you're down and you see someone smile, it could light up your day. And it's such an incredible, powerful concept that we don't always necessarily recognize. So it's incredible how much science and psychology is going to match up with faith, because it's about humanity. It's about us as individuals.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the three of you for coming today as guests. I don't know if you'd like to add anything else to conclude the show.
Thank you. I mean, it's people like you who bring these things to the public sphere. And we can only say that we could do how much more we could do with media and with public discussions such as these, all the more. So it's a great credit to you.
Oh,
yeah, thank you.
It was a privilege and a delight. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for this topic. The topic was incredibly important. I think if we want to flourish in life, it's impossible without the gift of forgiveness.
Agreed.